Welcome. Good to have you along for video number 3, which is planning and outline your novel. This method will hopefully apply to any and all. As I mentioned before, I have had nonfiction books published and fiction, so this has been very helpful to me in all those avenues. So in the last video, we did talk about a scene that you had in your mind, and it sort of represented the novel. It was something that played permanently and that you had refined over time. It was sort of synonymous with the actual novel itself. You know, it's almost a catalyst. So that scene, I did want you to work on that, write it, perfect it, and get it to a point where you actually feel that it is representative of exactly what you envisioned. So you have captured this perfectly. This is important because we are somewhat in a helicopter view looking down at our novel, and we have a bit of the can't see the forest for the trees scenario. So we need immersion, and that immersion serves as a foothold for us to gain access in. And this is something that I have found very helpful. It works to almost psychologically give you a foothold and a point of entry in. And each day you can then read those chapters, and this makes you feel as though you have now gained access into the novel. It also serves for another important purpose, and that is it allows you to establish a point where you do not quite know the sequence that follows after this point, and you may not know the sequence that led up to this point. But this now allows us to understand this point in detail, the character, the plot, the elements involved, the conflict, the difficulties, and then to actually plot and outline the sequence that follows and the sequence that led up to this point. So what do they look like? Well, for me, they are who, what, where, when, and why. Who is in this scene? What story elements are involved? Where does it take place? When is it happening? And why is it relevant to the plot? Okay. So if you imagine a block and these scenes are just marked as a sequence, you can use any method you would like, and you've got these who, what, where, when, why titles. You don't have to complete every part. You just complete what you know at this particular point. As you go forward, you might be rippling back and rippling forward and adjusting those as new developments take hold. So we're looking for conflict, key events, people involved, motivations, resolutions. We are also looking for maybe subplots, anything else you have in mind at this particular point. Are there going to be gaps? Of course there will. And you should just embrace the gaps. To return to our other jigsaw puzzle analogy, there is no start point that is the right way to do this. So you could be, for example, at a midpoint, you could be on the right-hand corner, you could be anywhere in here, and you're just building it out and not trying to complete whole segments before you move on, because I don't think that is helpful. So move on and keep doing what is in front of you. We're using René Descartes' method, which is break it into as many pieces as you can and start with the simplest, the ones you know. So method one is to keep writing scenes in the sequence or leading up to the sequence of the scene that you actually wrote. This actually gives you, again, that immersion, which is very good. It lets you be in the novel with the characters, with following the plot at the location. And this allows you then to keep building towards that. It has a great effect, I mentioned earlier. Each morning, I would start writing, and I would begin by reading back over these scenes and chapters that I've already done. And this has a way of uploading and, again, putting me in to the novel, which helps greatly in continuing on with new scenes or going back to other scenes or possibly jumping out to another entire segment. The second option is to just pick those random idea bubbles that you have and to document the who, what, where, when, why of those random pieces, and to build up several scenes that embody this idea. This, again, is good work. It will allow you to flush out your story more. Where will you be? Typically, you'd be in Act 2. That's where you'd normally see things more clearly. You might be in Act 1, which is the setup, right? The characters. You may have very clear ideas on the characters. They may be based on people you know. And because of that, you have a very clear image and you want to capture those people in the settings that you have envisioned them in. So you might be in setup, which is about 25% of the novel. More than likely, you'll be in confrontation. You may also be in the conclusion. You may have a clear idea on how this all comes together for a satisfying conclusion. Build out the idea bubbles. The third idea is to simply go back to Act 1 and to do who, what, where, when, why, and just go through those 3 acts and document them from start to finish. This is something that's happened on some novels. I mentioned I'm working on my 6th novel at the moment, about halfway through. So I'm clearly into the confrontation right now. So some novels, they I had a very clear idea on the confrontation and the scene that I envisioned. I mentioned in a previous video that that scene became my prologue. So it became chapter 1. And chapter 2 was then 3 weeks, 3 months earlier. And then we follow through the sequence of events leading up to what put my character in this place and time. You're trying to take what is an idea and conceptualize it, and not trying too hard if you can't envision everything at this particular time. If you can imagine the complexity of a novel, an entire story, with people and time and places and a sequence of events and story elements and dialogue, you're going to have huge, very clear ideas on some things and be very vague on others. And I think it's okay to leave those pieces because they do fall into place as we immerse ourselves into the story and then follow our characters through this sequence. So during this time, research is important. So you are going to books, mainly online, and you're researching people, locations, language, all manner of elements that are in the story. Old days of traipsing down to the library and spending all day there made life a lot more difficult, but we literally have everything at our fingertips now. So this does make life a lot easier. You are refining as much as you can. Don't be afraid that you outline a scene, you start documenting that scene, you then have ideas of the dialogue that takes place in there, so you begin to document the dialogue and the interaction between those two, and then you have very clear views of the location and what drives the story, the development that occurs during it, and in the end say, well, you know, I'm going to actually immerse myself in and generate this scene. And that is not a bad thing to do. It is a very good thing because it serves as stepping stones. These are points of entry that, as I mentioned before, we would like to have, that are very important for us to have. I find that some people, as I mentioned before, are very good with guidance, and others are very good editors. We need to go to people, and if we are asking guidance, we need to not coerce them into agreeing with us. Okay, so we need to frame what our question is, let that sit on them, and then help with their, let's get a different perspective on it. Equally, I found that the editors are never very good at guiding or the creative element to that process. You need to ask the right question to the right source that you have. I'm reminded of a Josh Billings quote. His quote was, when people come asking me for advice, I find out exactly what they want to hear, and then I tell them. So this is not helpful to us. You need to use your sources, and I do tax them quite a bit, and they are wonderful, invaluable. Go to each with what you need, and then get that feedback that would be ideal. You should have blocks at this particular time. and those blocks are looking good towards a full storyboard. You do have gaps, but that's okay. Don't get frustrated at not having all the answers, everything that you should. You're just not being kind to yourself to say, I don't have everything completely outlined and completely organized in my mind at this particular stage. And I think it's okay to just accept the fact that that's okay. You know, just keep building it out and then find ways in and then build that out and move towards a point of actually having not a complete outline, but a good majority of it. Adversity actually has a way of bringing forward talents that would otherwise have lain dormant. And so if we talk about guidance, for example, I have always wanted that guidance on exactly where I should be going. And you don't normally get it. Well, what I was given was multiple paths, which at the time didn't seem particularly helpful. But what happened in the process is that you keep going down paths, and even if they are the wrong path, you gain experience in now being able to recognize the right path. And so, in a way, my request was answered, right? Because as I practiced and became more practiced at this process, this then gave me the insight and the guidance to actually choose paths more carefully and more often than not choose the right path. So don't look on that as a negative. Look on it as a work in progress towards the right. I'm reminded of a story by two engineering students years ago. It was a strange difference. We had one student who came into labs to build a circuit. And whenever this student built the circuit always worked perfectly. They would call me over. They would say, Nigel, looks good. I would test the circuit, say, yep, looks good. You okay, no questions? And then they would leave early. There was another student that always built the same circuit, and whatever happens, it never worked. It would never work. And this student used to call me over and then say, what should happen? And I would say, okay, well, you know the methods. Divide it, halfway, half split method, test the midpoint. If you have a signal, move forward. If you don't have something, go back. And so this student would then troubleshoot the circuit, then it would work, call me over, and then they would leave. Both students came to the final. The student who actually always built the circuit and it always worked, built the circuit and it didn't work. The person who built the circuit and it never worked, built the circuit and it didn't work. So then a strange sequence occurs. The student that had the experience with troubleshooting set about to troubleshoot the circuit, found the problem, fixed the problem, and passed the test and left. The student that did not have any experience in that sat staring at it, trying to work out what to do, but having no experience with that, and then floundered and failed the test. So adversity seems to be a good thing for us. And I think we just need to always look at it differently and come into it differently and see it as a learning experience. Writing the novel, you are a one-person operation. basically, everything is happening in here, which is intimidating to a large extent. However, if we go through methodically, slowly, and plan, and then not see difficulties as difficulties, but see them differently, we can always sort of work towards the end point, coming in from different places, different angles, and then eventually crafting our finished product. In the outline, we should work on any points where you have dialogue and document any dialogue, any locations, any confrontations, developments in the character, even contradictions, because all of these parts sort of define a person. They talk about the character arc as the novel progresses, but your character is put into extraordinary situations, and they are then adjusting and adapting accordingly, and how they respond and how they act during that. This is critical for the reader to understand the person. I'm reminded of a C.S. Lewis quote: "It is the blows that hurt and harm us. Those are the ones that shape us and form us." And unfortunately, I think this is true. Even though it's a detail, do not hesitate to document that detail. And if that elaborates into a fully blown scene or chapter, let it go and let it out and put it down right then and there. Because all this will do is give you a clearer view of everything in the near vicinity of that. So let's just talk a little bit more about these three acts and sort of why they exist and why we should actually use them as a guide. It doesn't mean we have to follow it. You use it as a means of breaking your novel into three parts. It is strangely what the reader unconsciously expects. So I would recommend that you use it as a loose framework and not be afraid to stray, and not try and hold yourself tightly to the three acts. Act 1 is the setup. This is about 25% of the novel. You're introducing your protagonist, time, place, setting, the current situation. You're introducing your other characters, their time, place, setting, and there is an incident in the setup that sort of transitions you from setup to Act 2, which is confrontation. This disrupts everything and it sets the story in motion. Act 2 has a start point, and that is connected to the incident at the end of Act 1. You then have your protagonist facing obstacles, conflict. You have your first trigger point occurring here, and then you have a shift, which is a major revelation during this. Then we have a second trigger point, another turning point, and all of these leading towards the final challenge. How many you have is not carved in stone. You have rising tension during this point, character growth, and the story is driving itself very strongly forward during the confrontation. During Act 3, which is the last 25% of the novel, you have the climax here, which is the final challenge, a decisive confrontation. You also are tying together all your loose ends and bringing it to a satisfying conclusion. Sometimes I have strayed on some of my novels from here. I have strayed intentionally because I do not want them to feel like formula. I want them to feel natural and to feel that these stories are so immersive that the reader emotionally resonates and sees different connections and different points in there each and every time. To complete, we are taking our outline, which serves as a roadmap, a blueprint for the novel, and now we are going to drill down into more and more specific pieces. As we do that, we will see things more clearly, and you should then jump out and document more of the outline as it becomes clear. So if there are foggy parts, once you get in close and you clear the fog, you may see more parts in ahead of you and more parts behind you. These parts may also interfere with other parts that you have documented, so there will be a sort of ripple back and ripple forward effect. But I would take your time and look at the outline, and has there ever been a point where my outline is fully documented and then I start the novel? The answer is never. That has never happened. However, as I have written more and more segments, more and more scenes, more chapters, more parts of the outline have become clearer to me. And there was a point, I'd say, about at the halfway point, or possibly even a little further, where the full story has now made itself known. And you can never quite know, because you do create characters who are, if you've done it right, and you work hard on those characters in the beginning of the novel, they literally have a life of their own. And what I envisioned as a small scene became much larger because of the people involved. The dialogue drifted into other elements I had not envisioned. And the story then took a different turn as this progressed. So this should always be seen as fluid. And locking it down, I would say that you want enough to give you an outline, to give you that direction to go, but you need to be fluid enough to allow yourself to move as you progress through. Thank you very much for joining me. I do hope this was helpful, and I will see you again on the next video. Bye for now.